Space Coast Daily is Brevard's most trusted news. Through spacecoastdaily.com and Space Coast Daily's social media reach, hundreds of thousands of people stay informed every day. Through Space Coast Daily's unmatched digital reach, with the Space Coast Daily's direct mail newspaper and Space Coast Daily the magazine in print, our loyal and engaged viewers enjoy free local news they can trust every day, and all at no charge thanks to our successful advertising clients, and also at our special events at Space Coast Daily Park in Vieira, where hundreds of thousands of people see our clients' advertisements. Call today to get your message seen on Space Coast Daily and take your business to new heights. Get launched with Space Coast Daily. Call 321-323-4460 today. Welcome back to the Space Coast Daily TV studios right here on beautiful Mare Island and Brevard's Space Coast. And we're really pleased to be back with you today. And today we've got a really interesting hour, we think, for you, approximately, with three very interesting people who've come into the Space Coast Daily studios today to chat with us about their beliefs and why they're running for the U.S. Senate here in Florida. Today in the studio we have, first of all, on the left of your screen, we have Stephen B. Grant, and in the middle we have Edward A. Gray, and on the right side you'll see Denis Misgoy, and you're going to get to know these three gentlemen here on Space Coast Daily as to why they're running for the U.S. Senate as independent candidates and their hopes and dreams should they be elected to serve you here in Florida. So first of all, the format for today's forum, if you will, we are going to first of all let each candidate tell us about themselves, their background, their suitability for office in their mind, and once we've done that, then we're going to have a series of questions which each candidate will have a chance to answer. The questions are not known ahead of time. They're questions designed so that if you were in the studio today, the sort of questions you would ask these folks to get to know them better, so you can decide who to cast your vote for. And it's a very important midterm coming up. November 8th is Election Day. So, and at the end of the introductions, we're going to go through the questions. At the very end, each of the candidates will have an opportunity to ask one question to the other candidates, and we'll get their opportunity to answer those at that time. Well, first of all, we're going to start alphabetically on the left-hand side of your screen. Stephen B. Grant, tell us about yourself, Stephen, and why you choose to jump into this wonderful race.
Hello, I'm Stephen B. Grant, qualified candidate for U.S. Senator for Florida. I want to talk to you about my philosophy. I was a former mayor for the city of Boynton Beach, and I had the opportunity to serve my residents and my constituents, and the ability to make a difference is what is needed in our country right now. I feel that it is a time for change, and that the current system, regulated by lobbyists, the political parties, needs to change. And that is where my background as an attorney, licensed in Florida, Maryland, DC, and West Virginia, degrees in finance, traveled and studied all over around the world, makes me the difference, because I have the ability and knowledge to make the correct choice, the right choice, when decisions need to be made that affects individuals. Because the only people that are voting are individuals. Corporations have no vote. And that is where I have the common sense, the decorum, and the respect for our country to make the difference for the next 6 years. I live in the wonderful city of Boynton Beach with my wife and daughter, 2 dogs, and a cat. I like to go kayaking, go to the beach, see sporting events, and just spend times with friends and family. And so I look forward to sharing about myself with you this afternoon. Thank you.
Stephen, thank you very much indeed for that. Now onwards, Edward A. Gray, your background, sir.
Good afternoon. My name is Edward A. Gray. I am a write-in candidate for United States Senate. I believe that it's time that we stop looking at the politics of voting for the lesser of two evils, and we start putting in people that are actually going to make a change. I've been through the systems watching voting for many years. I'm a 63-year-old male, so I've actually voted quite a few times. I've always been a registered independent because I don't believe either party really represents fully what I see America needs to have done. And I think that it's time for regular Americans to get up there and start saying, this is what needs to be done, and this is how we're going to do it. And that's why I'm running. Now, as I said, I'm a 63-year-old male. I've been married 3 times. I have my lovely wife here with us today. We've been married for 15 years. We have 3 of our own children who are now grown adults. I'm happy to say I'm a grandfather also. I look forward to answering any and all questions that people may have, because I think it's time that we stop looking at this problem of the United States as a party problem and look at it as a people problem. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Edward. That's Edward A. Gray. And then to our right here, Denis Misgoy. Denis, your comment, sir.
Thank you. I could tell you a little bit about myself, being a former elected official, a family man, having worked in a few different fields, being a former educator, and being working these days as a professional software developer. But that's not what qualifies me uniquely among the candidates. I'm here to offer voters a serious and radical alternative to the establishment. I'm the only end the wars, bring all the troops home, cut all the overseas spending candidate. I am the only fight inflation, end the Federal Reserve, sound money through monetary freedom candidate. I am the only pure pro-free markets, anti-socialism candidate. I am the only police reform, end qualified immunity, end civil asset forfeiture candidate. I am the only end the drug war, no victim, no crime candidate. I am the only protect your life, liberty, property above everything else candidate. I am the libertarian candidate, the libertarian nominee for U.S. Senate, and representing the 3rd largest party in the United States, and really the best hope that we have for breaking the 2-party system, which has, I think all of us agree, brought us to a pretty bad spot in our history. So, thank you.
Thank you very much, Denis. We appreciate that. And we want to thank all 3 gentlemen for coming in today. We're at the Space Coast Daily TV studios with 3 gentlemen who've come up quite a distance today to join us, explain their background and why they want to be your senator here in Florida. Stephen B. Grant, Edward Gray, and Denis Misgoy, if you're just joining us now. Now then, we're going to go into some questions now to get to the beliefs of the candidates, and we hope this will help you decide who to vote for coming up November 8th. First of all, Stephen, you're up first with this one, and then we'll go down the line here. What motivated you to enter politics and why?
Well, I volunteered my time with the City Advisory Board, and I saw what was happening on the City Commission, and that is what catapulted me into finding out how do I get on the ballot, because I feel that if there is no candidate that you would want to vote for, you have the obligation and responsibility to be that candidate for other people to vote for. So I ended up being in a race against a 5-time incumbent mayor who outraised me $45,000 to $3,000, and because of our current system requires a majority vote, I was able to win the election. And so that is where I see right now the aspect of our parties disputing each other publicly and then agreeing behind closed doors as hurting our country. And I want to be that candidate, that next senator that opens the doors to the actual negotiations that are going on so that we are doing what is best for the citizens of this country, period.
Thank you very much, Stephen. Same question for Edward. What motivated you to enter politics and why?
Well, as I said before, I've watched over the years as we've had politician after politician getting on the Hill or even at the state level making promises that they never followed through with. Certainly there's been a couple of them that have pushed to do some things, but we've heard we're going to fix infrastructure. We've heard we're going to fix any type of healthcare system. We've heard that we're going to fix the military and the VA, and yet the proverbial can gets kicked down the road, and I'm going to change that. I'm going to put together the right amount of problem-solving people so that when we get to Washington, we will confront these issues and we will take care of them for the United States and for all of Americans.
Good. Same question for Denis Misgoy. What motivated you to enter politics and why?
Well, in terms of running for, office the first time, it's actually kind of a similar story to Stephen, at a much more local level where I lived in a special taxing district down in Miami-Dade County. We had some things going on where the board that was there at the time was just pushing certain projects that were very unpopular. And again, I asked when I had the chance, what do we have as a recourse? And they said, look, it's a public office. If they won't do what you want them to do, then you support somebody else when elections come around. And if there's nobody else, then somebody's got to step up. And so I did, and I won with 63% of the vote back in 2016 to get elected there. In terms of this kind of race, though, and in politics in general, to me it's been driven by just once kind of my eyes were open and really recognizing the depth of evil of certain policies that we have and the great harm that is done to so many people. I really can't look away and kind of sit on the sidelines anymore. So it goes to that sort of oft-repeated quote, the only thing necessary for the triumph of evil is for good men to do nothing. And I always say when I repeat this, look, I don't want to be so presumptuous enough to say that I'm such a good man, but I can't sit by and do nothing. When our country has been embroiled in endless wars that kill countless innocents, our country's being bankrupt, over 30 trillion in debt, over 9% inflation. Everybody's suffering a great deal unnecessarily because we have a political system that's dominated by two parties who share a view of an omnipotent government, and we need to break this cycle. And it's not going to be easy. It's not going to happen quickly. But if we don't do it and if none of us step up, then there's never going to be an opportunity for it to happen. And that's why I'm running.
Thank you, sir. Now, next question starts with Denis. If elected, what do you think will be your greatest strengths and your weaknesses?
My greatest strength will definitely be my commitment to principles, my commitment to the principles of peace and individual liberty. I feel confident based on my past experience and just who I am and what my knowledge is and everything all-encompassing, that I will stick by my principles, follow the examples of very few legislators in the past, somebody like a Ron Paul, who stood there even when it was unpopular, even within their own party, to stand against extremely bad policies. And I feel I can definitely bring that to the table and hopefully as well build upon that as a movement, as breaking through the two-party system, representing a third party, and again, breaking that duopoly over control in our government. In addition to that, biggest weakness, I think I might not get along with everybody quite so well. I'm not inclined to kind of gloss over these things, or I speak uncomfortable truths. I was eating dinner with family members last night and talking about, during when President Obama bombed the Doctors Without Borders hospital in Kunduz, Afghanistan. These are uncomfortable truths, or the assassination of Abdul Rahman al-Awlaki, who was a 16-year-old American citizen. These are uncomfortable things for people to hear, but it's important because we need to deal with reality. And I think that might be a weakness of me, maybe making more people uncomfortable.
Could be a strength. Time will tell. Okay, in the middle now, Edward Gray. If elected, what do you think will be your greatest strengths as a senator and any weaknesses you might have in your view?
Well, my greatest strength, of course, would be that I see what the problem is, like many of the Americans out there see. It's not who belongs to a party, it's the party themselves that have caused this division. And regardless of what party you belong to, we can all get together and we can all make the changes necessary. Now, my idea would be that I will form a coalition of American First candidates that have won their states and put them together when we're on the Hill. And we are going to stop this administration with this push towards socialism, which a lot of us believe is where they're heading. There are so many things that are going on that shouldn't be going on at a government level. I stand firmly with the Constitution, the Bill of Rights, the Declaration of Independence as our foundational documents of this country. And I think we've gotten away from those, and I think we've allowed our government to get way out of control. The idea originally was that the states were supposed to have the power and the government was supposed to be limited, and we've gotten far away from that. And I want to bring us back to that. Thank you.
Thank you, Edward. Over to Stephen B. Grant. Stephen, if elected, what do you think will be your greatest strengths and any weaknesses you might have?
I believe my greatest strengths as a former Republican and former Democrat is to make our government meet in the middle. Is that, I feel that government can change fast, but it moves slow. And so that is where I would like to be that candidate to help the two sides to move together so that we are moving forward as a country rather than just keep on turning our heads left and right. One of the things that I would feel might be a weak for me is that I love my family and I enjoy spending time with them. I love taking them to all the events that I was when I was at mayor. So I've gone to different art exhibits, sporting events, churches, synagogues, mosques. Everywhere I go, if I can bring my family with me, that's what I'll do because that makes life a little bit better.
We're in the Space Ghost Daily TV studios, folks. If you're just tuning in, U.S. Senator for Florida will be chosen this November 8th, and we have 3 of the independent candidates in the studio today who have come over here to introduce themselves to you and let you know of their beliefs. Now then, we're going to go back to Stephen on this one for the first question. What have been the biggest challenges that you have had to face in your life, and how did you overcome them?
So the biggest challenges that I had to face in my life is when I got married for the first time and it did not go out as planned. And I had to learn about having successful relationships. And I think that has ended up turning into one of my greatest strengths, is having that look into what went wrong and to figure out a solution. I was able to come out of ahead after that divorce and end up running for mayor because I had the knowledge of how to have successful relationships with the people that I love around me, my friends, and also my constituents, my clients, and my adversaries, because we are all in this together in this country. And that is where I feel we have allowed political parties to blame each other, which makes us lose sight that we need to solve problems, not create new ones.
Thank you, Stephen. Edward, in the middle, what have been the biggest challenges that you've had to face in your life, and how did you overcome them?
I think one of the biggest challenges I had in my life was when I was 16 years old. I got into a motorcycle accident, and I'm sure many out there have had the similar thing, but having to overcome a year in the hospital and 5 different operations, losing a ½ inch of the bone in my leg, it left me and the doctors wondering if I was ever going to be whole again. So I joined the Army, and I was able to make it through basic training and went to my first duty station, which was the 1st of the 41st 2nd Armored Division over in Texas. I was training for airborne when the doctors reevaluated my leg and said, if you re-break that leg, then the Army will be responsible for you for the rest of your life, and that's not fair. So they gave me an honorable discharge for medical reasons, and I took it happily, but I've always carried with me all of the things that I learned, including the oath that I gained when I joined the military.
Thank you, Edward. Denis Misgoy, what have been the biggest challenges that you've had to face in your life, and how did you overcome them?
I think the biggest challenge, certainly what pops into my mind in particular, is an experience when I had, actually over a certain stretch of time, but I had moved back down to Miami after being out of state for a few years after getting married. I had an extended period of unemployment, struggled to kind of get back in with the workforce, finally got working, and things were going pretty well. My first child was born, and she was about 2 weeks old. We had just started paperwork to go and purchase a home, and that was on a Saturday, and on the Monday I lost my job. And that was an extremely humbling, and there was quite a few months of uncertainty. And this was after almost a year of uncertainty prior to that. And so it was, for me, at least in that was a particularly challenging time, not knowing what was going to happen, having a brand new baby. My wife was also going through a number of health issues immediately after the birth. And I got through it through faith, to be quite honest. A couple of experiences and just getting some reassurance, just listening to a particular hymn at church the next week, which wasn't even during the actual services. It was kids practicing for the program the next week. But something that really touched me deeply and kind of, again, just sort of re-solidified my faith in that at that point in time and allowed me to just put my head down and do what was necessary to make sure that I could do everything I could to provide for my family. Come around a few months later, and things turned out better than they could have possibly been prior to that. I was tremendously blessed, but that was after a period of uncertainty.
Thank you, Dennis. These are real people, folks, right? Real issues that we all face every day. And so it's fascinating stuff. Thank you very much. Right then, this one's for Dennis. What specific skills and experience do you have that will enable you to assume your role as an elected official and hit the ground running if you are elected?
I think I've had, as modest at a level as the experience that I have in an elected office is, I think it's quite transferable because it's what I expect to have happen. It's different for me as a libertarian, member of a third party, but also not just that, but having a real fundamental difference in view and policy positions to where I recognize that if I get elected, if I'm so fortunate to get elected and go to Washington, D.C., I'm going to be alone. Even if literally every other libertarian running for federal office in 2022 were to get elected, we would not have a whole lot of power there. And that was the experience I had when I served on the board of the special taxing district where I used to live. I spent the first 2 years losing every contentious vote, being outvoted by a hostile majority, 4-1 or 3-1, depending on how many people showed up to the meetings. I couldn't get anywhere. But I stuck with it. The community saw me, and they recognized what I was doing, and they appreciated it. And so when the midterms came around in 2018, a couple people, maybe not quite totally politically aligned with me, but more people were inspired to step up, took a couple of those seats, and then we were able to make real change. We brought transparency by making meetings more accessible. We cut spending on projects that nobody wanted. And we were able to do some good things. So what I think I can transfer to that is the recognition of this is a long game. Look, change doesn't come overnight. We can't expect that I'm just going to show up in Washington, D.C., want to cut the defense, they call it defense, I'm going to put it in quotes, spending without any resistance, and I'm just going to have my way policy-wise. I'm going to be on an island. Even if there was a dozen of us, we'd still be on an island without any real support from the big guys, but it's how we start. We have to chip away, and I want to see Florida lead the way and set the example for the rest of the country by doing it. So I'm ready to play the long game and be patient and do that and set the example because I did it before locally, and I'm excited to be able to do it again if I'm given the opportunity.
Thank you, Dennis. In the middle, Edward, what specific skills and experience do you have that will enable you to assume your duties and hit the ground running should you be chosen?
Well, I think first and foremost, I had a teenage daughter. If anybody's had a teenage daughter, they can understand what that means. As far as experience, I've been a superintendent running million-dollar jobs at any of the theme parks. I've owned my own business and managed to make $250,000 a year on our company. I've been out there running things and doing things. I don't do this to make friends. I do this to get something done. There will be people that will stand against me, and that's perfectly fine. There will be a lot more people that will want to work with me and change what we need changed in our federal government. And I think just like Ron DeSantis has protected Florida, I want to be the voice in D.C. for Florida.
Thank you, Edward. Over to Stephen. What specific skills and experience do you have that will enable you to assume your role as an elected official and hit the ground running should you be chosen?
So my experience as an attorney, I actually opened up my own law practice right out of law school. It was 2010 during the recession, and so not finding a job, I created my own career and represented numerous different individuals. And as I've gained clients over the years, I have had that well-rounded knowledge of everything that affects people on a day-to-day basis. As the mayor, I oversaw so many aspects of government, dealing with police, fire, utilities, sanitation, recreation, education, dealing with records, and then also going internationally to see our sister cities in Finland, Haiti, and Italy, and nationally Los Angeles, San Antonio, Charlotte, and to Washington, D.C. My breadth of knowledge is what's going to catapult me to make the changes that Florida needs to make the world a better place. Thank you.
Much. Recent poll activity asking folks what they're most concerned about. National inflation now almost at 10%. How would you work with your fellow senators up there to help your constituents here down in Florida?
When I found out the American Rescue Plan Act was coming out, I realized that it was going to cause a mass problem for our country because there was no way to pay for the $1.9 trillion that was being issued. And that's where we have to revamp our economy and understand and look at the current tax code, because right now we are taxing people inequitably and unequally. The fact is that the investment income is taxed at 15%, where earned income is taxed at 37%. Where does this affect the inflation is that we need to reduce our federal debt is the main thing, because right now it's over $500 billion every year that we are spending, and it's only going to increase when the Fed increases rates. So my main thing is that we need to reduce the debt, and we need to start cutting services where they are not needed.
Okay, over to Edward in the middle. With national inflation approaching 10%, folks trying to buy their gas and their groceries are really struggling. How will you work to help your constituents?
Well, the first thing I would do is stop all this money being sent to Ukraine. To me, that's crazy. We have so many needs here in the United States, and yet we're funding an entire country. Certainly, NATO was set up to be taking care of that a long time ago, and the fact that we're leading that charge again just makes me really upset that we have to deal with that. Now, my proposal was that I'd like to bring to the people, bring to the senators and Congress people, the idea of looking at either the flat tax or the fair tax and changing our tax code, because I think our tax codes have gotten out of hand. As far as I'm concerned, many people are ready to ride to Boston and throw tea in the water again because it's gotten that bad. So those would be the things that I would try and focus on, is looking at a better option for our taxes.
Okay, over to Denis. Same question. With national inflation approaching 10%, how will you work to help your constituents?
I'm glad for this question, and I agree somewhat with what some of my peers over here have said. We do need to cut spending. We should cut all foreign aid as well. I mean, to any country. The American taxpayer shouldn't be on the hook for any other country's budget. But the problem is deeper than that. Okay, we have this monetary system, and what we've learned, what we should have learned over the last 100 years, and particularly within the last 2 or 3 years, where trillions and trillions have been printed out of thin air, is that we cannot trust the federal government or any government or their adjacent central banks with control of the money supply. Money is too important. It is 1/2 of every transaction, pretty much. And so, because it's so important, we need the best option possible. We can achieve the best options through the free market. That's part of why I want to see us both audit and end the Federal Reserve. Since the Federal Reserve came into being, the value of the U.S. dollar has declined over 94%, and certainly we've taken a big hit within the last couple of years, as we've seen, due to a lot of the spending that was done in response to COVID, not just by the federal government through stuff like the CARES Act and these PPP loans, but also the Federal Reserve itself injecting money into the system. So what we need to do is we need to get away from this system, allow alternatives, get back to the Constitution. The Constitution doesn't authorize a central bank. It doesn't authorize fiat money. It says that nothing but gold and silver to be made legal tender. I'm certainly one who's willing to take on the opportunities of as well taking on the new technologies, Bitcoin and other cryptocurrencies, but let the market decide. Washington, D.C. doesn't know what's best for everyone. They certainly have proven that they cannot be trusted with control of the money supply. So my pitch is monetary freedom, because everybody deserves sound money. And how do we get their best? Everybody deserves a dollar that is worth as much tomorrow as it was yesterday when they earned it. They shouldn't be watching their bank account the same number, but the value has dropped. And that's what's happened over the last year to a terrible degree. And so we need to break this cycle, but to do that we have to break this monetary system. We have to get out of this, and means taking drastic steps and allowing the market to work to provide us a better option.
Thank you very much, folks. Just a reminder, if you're just tuning in, we're here in the Space Ghost Daily TV studios with three gentlemen who come into the studio today, introduce themselves to you, running for the U.S. Senate in Florida, and we're willing to give up their time and energy to come here today so that you could learn more about them. We hope this is helping you check the right box for you November 8th. Moving on now, you have to get things done, right? If you're chosen as a senator, you have to go to D.C. and you have to get things done and work with people. Describe how you will interact with your counterparts in order to be most effective for your constituents. We're going to start with Dennis.
I think to paraphrase a quote from Calvin Coolidge, or maybe I'll get it right, President Calvin Coolidge, it's much more important for us to stop bad bills than it is for us to pass good ones. Because so many bad things have been passed and so much waste, like we've talked about, but also the interventions overseas. So many bad things have been done in the name of the American people and at the expense of the American people. The most important thing I can try to do is stop that by casting a no vote, trying to amend bills where possible in order to remove some of the most onerous, problematic parts of that legislation. But in addition to that, where there is something important we can do, for example, like the War Powers Resolution that's currently going on to try to withdraw U.S. support for the Saudi coalition in the war of genocide in Yemen, like that sort of legislation, I think the way you move that sort of thing forward is you make issue-by-issue coalitions. We've seen people across the aisle between the two-party system who've made coalitions, folks like Ron Paul and Denis Kucinich back a decade or so ago, who would make a coalition on a particular issue like being anti-war, and that's what we would do. We would make coalitions by issue with everybody who's willing to step up, because there are people on both sides of that aisle, but also we want to bring in new people. We don't just want to see the red and blue teams, but we make issue-by-issue coalitions.
Interesting. Thank you, sir. That's Denis Misgoy. In the middle now, Edward A. Gray. Describe how you interact with your counterparts to get things done for your constituents.
I think the one main thing would be that people want to see this country do better, and we will all find each other and work these things out regardless of party. This is for the importance of our country. So whomever it is, whether it's a Democrat, a Republican, a Libertarian, another independent, it doesn't matter. I will work with them as long as they have sound bills that they're trying to work with. One of the main things I think is our biggest problem when it comes to those, and I know it's a little bit off of that, but I think that we should look at the idea of a bill can only be passed on its own merit. And stop this adding on to these bills, because that's what hurts our country the most, is people putting their special projects on these bills. So if a bill is introduced, it should be able to be passing on its own merit. And that's what I would focus on.
Okay, over now to Stephen B. Grant. Same question. Describe how you interact with your counterparts to get things done for your constituents.
So as an attorney, I understand that words matter. And so when we're crafting legislation, each word has a specific purpose. And so that's where I'd be working with my colleagues in the Senate and and the House to draft the language needed so that we are making the best choice, the right choice for the citizens of the United States. And that is what I would bring because of my experience. Similar to when I was mayor, I was able to had something on at the end of a bill, or make sure that we were doing what was correct for the people. As I mentioned earlier, as a former Republican, Democrat, I feel that if you're not friendly with the people, they are not going to be friendly with you. And we do need, and one of the best things about friendship is the ability to disagree. And so that's where we have lost that in Washington, D.C., and I would like to be that no party affiliate that is the common core for the Republicans and Democrats to get back on Team USA.
Thank you very much. Okay, our next question is for Stephen, starting out with you. It's always nice to be able to have 20/20 hindsight vision, right? So what important decisions in your life have you made in the past few years that if you could, you would go back and change, knowing what you know now?
Well, I've made a lot of decisions in the past 6 years, and one of the things that I would want to change is that when the City of Boynton Beach or the Community Redevelopment Agency, we had that focus for home ownership. I feel that our federal, state, county, city governments are not doing enough for home ownership, and after the pandemic, now they are competing with real estate funds that are increasing our residential homes for ownership, and people are losing out on the American dream. So that is where, that would be the one thing that I would try to change, is to make sure that we put in place home ownership as a major part of any time new homes are built.
To Edward. Edward, same question. It'd be nice to have 2020 vision. What important decisions have you made in your life in the past few years that if you could go back and change, and why?
You know, there's probably been a couple of decisions, more than I want to admit, that I've made in my life. But I think that's what makes us who we are, is whether they're good or bad, the outcome of those decisions. That's how we form and become the person we are, is we learn from those experiences. And I've learned from my past decisions, whether they were bad or good, and I plan on using all of that knowledge to move forward.
Okay, thank you, sir. Moving over to Dennis. If you had 2020 hindsight vision, Dennis, what important decisions that you've made in the past few years would you go back and change, and why?
I mean, my first thought was I probably wouldn't change anything, because I even with the mistakes, I like where I'm at in life, and I'm happy by and large. But there is one. I think about it, and it wasn't a conscious decision, but a few years ago in 2020, when everything was going on, my father, who had just turned 80 that year and was still working full time, the same job he had been at since I was in Pampers, he was a victim of a hit and run, and after a few months in the hospital, passed away. And the regret that I have is that it was something we talked about. And my father lived a pretty interesting life in terms of having immigrated between different places. And I remember speaking to him within the last year or so of his life and saying, and I had this great idea. And I said, look, we're going to sit down and I'm just going to record, and can you tell me some stories and all this other stuff so we can really preserve some of this? And he told me his answer was, anytime. And I never made the time. And so that would be my big regret, that I didn't prioritize that. It wasn't a conscious decision, but it's still a decision, and so that's one that if I'm going to pick something that I regret from the last few years, that's definitely it.
Thank you very much. Powerful words there, indeed. I can relate to that, Dennis. Indeed. Okay, now this question is back at you now, Dennis. Let's talk about some previous or current politicians that you've admired, and why.
I've dropped his name a few times, but it's easy for me. It's Ron Paul, former congressman from Texas and 1988 Libertarian presidential nominee. That was the first politician I ever donated to back when he was running in the Republican primary in 2008. Even though I'd sort of already soured on two-party politics, he really had the message that kind of crystallized all this for me, the recognition of government overstepping its bounds, going beyond the Constitution, violating basic human rights, and obviously the endless wars abroad, all the terrible policies. And he was a guy who, over decades and decades, having been first elected to the U.S. House in 1976 and leaving after finishing up his last term in 2012, with a little bit of a break in the middle, but for a very long time, and always stuck to his principles. And so to me, regardless of how much the rest of the world maybe came along and was able to make the change, I think it's a tremendous accomplishment to be there in, in that place of all places, and to hang on to your principles and to not be corrupted by it, but to stand on these principles of individual liberty, peace, good government, limited government, and so that would be. If I need to pick a politician, obviously I still want to kind of do my own thing, but if I'm going to pick somebody that I would admire, that is definitely the one.
Okay. Edward, over to you. What previous or current politicians have you most admired, and why?
I think one of the major ones would be George Washington. He was, of course, the founder of our country, but he was also an independent. And he said it many a times, along with Benjamin Franklin and others that are our founding fathers, that we have to watch out for party and politics that go with them, because they can damage this country. I look to Teddy Roosevelt because I believe he blazed the trail for the United States in many ways. I think that I look at many people that have been in office. Angus King, which was one of the first independents ever elected as a governor in the state of Maine, which I lived up in Maine for 10 years. My real father's from there, and I was there when he passed away. It's a beautiful state, but home has always been Florida.
Thank you very much, Edward. Over to Stephen now. What current or previous politicians have you most admired and why?
I loved history, and so with the last name Grant, I've done quite a bit on Ulysses S. Grant and what he has done to end the Civil War, to fight for Reconstruction in the South, and his whole life of not always making the right choice, but making and learning and doing what he could do and making the best choice that he felt at that time. The other one would be John F. Kennedy, who really created the space race in this country, and created so much technology, had the movement for the civil rights in this country. And so those aspects of making sure that everyone is treated like a human in our country is something where I feel not all of our current politicians are doing.
Stephen, this next question will start with you. The Ukraine-Russian war on drugs, the border, taxes, war on terror, immigration, all massive issues facing our country. If elected, what specific issues would you attack first and why?
So, out of those that you just mentioned, the war in Ukraine, I support self-determination, democracy, and that is why I feel that we as the leading country in democracy need to make sure that all nations have that ability. And hearing from the Ukrainian president asking for help against an authoritarian regime, that is something where we need to be. I'd like to end the war on drugs, as it is a medical issue, not necessarily a criminal issue. The fact that we have an opioid epidemic that has been going on for years now, with people dying every day from fentanyl, there is something that we have lost with just saying no. And we need to find a solution to the self-help medication that is going on in our country. But the main issue that I would say is that it's term limits for Congress, to end the aristocracy and corruption that's going on, immigration court reform. We do not have an independent judiciary, making sure that people who need asylum and can get asylum do actually get it, and we have incentivize illegal immigration.
Thank you, sir. Over to Edward in the middle, same question. If elected, what specific issues will you make your priorities and why?
I think one of the main focuses would be to try and put a stop to this Green New Deal. I agree that there is a problem with the environment, and I agree that humans may have caused a major part of it. But I think there are alternatives, and before you take an entire nation off of their reliance of gas and oil, you need to actually have some type of viable solution. There are things like carbon capture plants, which can do the work of 40,000 trees, that if we were to start putting those out, we could change what the problem is when it comes to our environment. Immigration, of course, is a major problem. I've said that I agree with President Trump in the respect of finishing the wall. We need to be a sovereign nation and have a division between us and other countries. Immigration is a personal thing that people earn. It's not given out freely, and people need to understand that if you come here illegally, that's not the correct way. If you want to become an American, there's a lot that needs to be done for you to be an American. When it comes to our government itself, I think it's time that we start limiting our government and what its abilities and where it goes, because we've gotten a government that has just chewed up so many things that we need to step back and say, this is enough, and we need to start cutting back on the government. There are so many issues that I could continue to go on with, but I think you get the main idea of what I'm thinking.
Thank you, Edward. Great. Over to Denis Misgoy. If elected, what specific issues will you make your priorities and why?
The biggest priority, and this was somewhat touched upon, we have the conflict, actually in both dueling conflicts right now, we have the with Russia over Ukraine, and again, our leaders are instigating also a conflict simultaneously with China at the same time, is absolute madness. Even if you think that the causes are justified, which I would take a little bit of issue with, the Ukrainian government banning 10 or 11 political parties, to me, doesn't really epitomize democracy, but even putting that part aside, even if you think it's completely justified, there needs to be a recognition on the limits of our power and a recognition of the real possibility of dangerous consequences. We're talking about escalating a conflict with the nation that has the next largest nuclear arsenal in the world. And then you've got another one in China also where we're, again, pushing buttons and causing trouble rather than seeking peaceful resolutions to these issues. It's telling that Secretary of State Blinken, the only time he's talked with his Russian counterpart, Foreign Minister Lavrov, was to try to negotiate a release of Brittany Griner. They have made a decisive effort to not try to resolve, and plenty of politicians, including our incumbent Senator Marco Rubio, has cheered on the idea. Him and folks like Hillary Clinton and Dan Crenshaw have cheered on the idea of a protracted insurgency in Ukraine to try to bleed the Russians. They don't care what it's going to cost. The sort of sarcastic way of referring to it is they want to fight Russia down to the last Ukrainian. So when we talk about caring about the Ukrainian people, I don't think this is it. I think caring for the Ukrainian people is trying to end the conflict and not get more of them killed and get their country destroyed by needless warfare over things that don't need to be. There may be some legitimate issues and there's some things to work out, but that's why you have to have diplomacy. On top of that is the inflation. Again, I talked about it earlier, but Americans are suffering, and they're suffering because we have an irresponsible, destructive inflationary monetary policy pushed by the Federal Reserve to enable the reckless spending of Congress, but also to enable their own agendas. And so we need to abandon that system, and we need to allow people to explore the alternatives and break the cycle that we're in, because it's too important. It's affecting everybody, and there's no getting away from it. It benefits a few at the expense of the many.
We're live here in the Space Coast Daily TV studios in Merritt Island. These three gentlemen, who you might not recognize, they're not living in Brevard County, so these names might be unfamiliar, and you're used to seeing Brevardians running for office, but we really appreciate these three gentlemen coming into the studios today, independent candidates for the U.S. Senate position here in Florida, have traveled in to join you with us here on the channel today. I want to really thank them for doing that, and thank them for their sincerity here today. Looking back here, what specific decisions do you feel that the incumbent senator has made over the past few years that you take real exception to, and why? Denis.
I mean, it goes broader than one single decision. I mean, I just kind of touched upon his sort of antagonism for foreign conflict with Russia over Ukraine. As well, he was recently, I think a couple weeks ago, while around in Central Florida, managed to make a statement that our military should be focused on blowing up Chinese aircraft carriers. Which, yeah, how are you going to pursue diplomacy and avoid conflict when that's the kind of rhetoric coming out of your elected officials? So to me, it goes back to the foreign policy. There's nothing that poses a bigger threat. We're less than a week away from, or less than a week past from the 21st anniversary of 9/11, where what happened? Due to our foreign policy antagonizing and motivating people in other parts of the world to take the extraordinary steps that led to the deaths of almost 3,000 Americans, almost over 25,000 that were injured that day. One of the biggest tragedies and the deadliest terrorist attack in world history, I believe. And it happened because of irresponsible policy, antagonizing, and this sort of thing, and we need to get away from that, and we need to break that cycle, because that's what poses the biggest threat to the American people, and certainly even more so when we talk about it with countries like China and Russia, that maybe they don't necessarily have the military might to do the kind of stuff that they talk about. The warmongers and the foreign policy establishment within our country likes to beat the drum and act like, Russia and China are trying to take over the world, that they have the means and the resources to do that. They don't have that. But what they do have is that if we were to go all out and try to depose them, they have nukes. They have stuff to fight back. And again, it would be the American people, the regular American people, who would suffer for the decisions of these elites, such as Marco Rubio, who again is one of these guys who's constantly beating that drum.
What specific decisions that the incumbent Rubio has made over the past few years do you disagree with, and why?
The biggest decisions that Rubio had done was voting for red flag laws. I believe that the Second Amendment is a standalone statement that shall not be infringed, means shall not be infringed. I believe that we have the right to keep and bear arms, and I think that the red flag laws were a dangerous avenue for anybody to head down. I think that his past record when it came into the 2019, not showing up to vote at all, made Florida look really bad in many respects, because you should be there for every vote, for every reason to represent our country. I really don't want to badmouth the man, because I know he's done the best he can. He has pushed through some things that were great for the country, but I think it's time for a change, and I think I'm the one that's going to change it.
Okay. Over to Stephen B. Grant. Stephen, what specific decisions has the incumbent made in office that you disagree with, and why?
So one of the things that happened to our country over the summer was the Dobbs versus Jackson ruling at our Supreme Court. And so as a conservative, Senator Rubio does not necessarily support the right to privacy for informed medical decisions. And that is something that I would champion, so that everyone who wants to make a medical decision is not impaired by the government, and furthermore, that the government does not allow people does not require people to take medical decisions. I feel that when the former government tried to force people to take vaccines, I'm against that. I always encouraged people to get their vaccine when I was mayor. However, it's not something that our governments can force. I'll tell you the one thing that I did think he did well, except he doesn't have enough friends to do it, is to make sure we have permanent daylight savings. I feel that having the extra time of light in the afternoon would be better, especially in the winter.
Okay. Thank you very much for that one. In the news yesterday and today, Governor DeSantis flying 50 Venezuelan immigrants up to Martha's Vineyard. Let's talk about that, Stephen. What do you think of that move by Governor DeSantis?
So the governor used taxpayer money to fly Venezuelan refugees seeking asylum to Martha's Vineyard. I don't feel that that's the best use of taxpayer dollars. I feel that as part of what I was saying with immigration court reform is that we need to find a location for people who are seeking asylum to come to first. One of the things that I mentioned was hypothetically that Guantanamo Bay may be that place, or another place, because in our history in Florida we had the Freedom Tower when people from Cuba needed a place to go to seek asylum. For my ancestors it was Ellis Island in New York. So I feel that the federal government needs to pick a place for people to go to if they are looking for asylum, rather than anywhere on the open border or anywhere along the coast of Florida and coming on in ships. So that's where I think the main thing is the focus, to make sure that the people who are coming here seeking asylum can do that, and if they are not if they're not allowed to stay in our country, that we find a place for them to go.
Okay. Over to Edward. Governor DeSantis flying 50 Venezuelan immigrants up to the very rich real estate of Martha's Vineyard in a move yesterday. What's your opinion of that move?
I thought it was brilliant. I thought that it was about time that they got to feel the brunt of what Florida and other red states like Texas and Arizona and any of the other border states have been feeling with this mass migration of immigrants that are coming in, and they're carrying the load. So to spread it out across the rest of the country, and especially to those blue states that claim to be freedom for asylum, is a necessity, so that they start to feel what everybody else is feeling. I think that I applaud them for it.
Okay. over to Denis Misgoy. Dennis, same question. Governor DeSantis flying up 50 immigrants to Martha's Vineyard this week. What do you think?
So as the son of, my mother being a Cuban and her family that came here pretty soon after the revolution to flee communism, to see that a bunch of people who were trying to escape that type of government, socialist government in Venezuela, that they were sent, that they were basically used for this political stunt. I think that's kind of embarrassing. It's kind of repulsive. And it's also a misuse of taxpayer dollars as well. We can't decry and talk about waste and not talk about somebody using taxpayer funds for a political stunt. Broader than that, and again, it's just a sort of silly one-upmanship at the taxpayer's expense, while ignoring the actual core problems. When we talk about our immigration system, it's not a question of enforcement or strategies or building a wall or hiring more border patrol. Our policy at its core is defective because it's based on ideas of collectivism, of you have to go and get permission, that people aren't free by their nature, rather than going back to really America's traditions prior to 100 years ago, where people came and they were able to get processed within a few hours. They weren't going through years and years. We've made it so that for many people there is no legal path, and for those where there is a legal path, it's a very arduous, difficult path, unless you happen to be among the ultra-wealthy. So we reward the elites, but the regular people, what we've created is a situation where the path of least resistance is for people to circumvent the system. And we're never going to solve this problem and get control of immigration. I say get control, or get a handle on immigration, unless and until we abandon this system of centralized control and bloated bureaucracy and instead embrace a system that treats people as individuals, and where the path of least resistance is not to circumvent the system, but for the overwhelming majority of people who aren't trying to commit violent crimes and do things of that nature, where for those people the path of least resistance is to go through properly, be documented, and go on and live like normal law-abiding citizens.
Okay, thank you very much. Now we're going to go into the final part of our forum here today. Once again, we want to thank Denis Misgoy, Edward Gray, and Stephen Grant for joining us today in the studio as independent candidates for U.S. Senator for Florida. Now then, gentlemen, you can now ask your opponents, or here in the forum today, the gentlemen that are with you, a question, and they'll have a chance to answer that question. So we're going to start with Denis, and you can address Edward first.
I'm going to do the same question for both of you gentlemen, which is basically, obviously, I come from a standpoint and a perspective on politics that is a little bit more outside the mainstream, certainly a rejection of the two-party system and what they do. Whereas I think a lot of policies, at least I'll say some of the ones that I heard that stick out in my mind, were stuff that, is supported by one party or the other, and certainly in rhetoric. I mean, Republicans claim to be pro-Second Amendment, but then they pass red flag laws, or Rubio actually sponsoring them, for example. But my question to you guys is, where we're talking about standing outside of the two-party system and representing something different. So what policy positions do you guys hold that are outside of the two-party system? Where are you willing to be sort of radical and represent something that nobody there is giving voice to?
Well, I go back to the idea that I'm not a politician, so I won't play the political games. If I see an issue that I think needs to be handled or needs to be addressed, then I have no problem with spending whatever amount of time. I sink my teeth into anything like I have with the jobs I've run or the companies I've run, and I'm like a pit bull. I won't let go until it's done. So that's where I see I would be able to do what needs to be done up in Washington.
So to the question is, how would I be a radical? I'm not saying that I'm a radical person to begin with. I'm kind of the middle of the road person, and I feel that both parties are radicals at this point. But one of the things that I would focus on is our newest citizens. So under the 14th Amendment, everybody born in this country is a citizen, and currently our country is incentivizing people to have children without getting married. If you are able to get all these benefits if you don't have a job or if you're not married, such as food stamps, EBT benefits, and the main thing is the federal Head Start program, where if you have a job, the federal government's not going to support your child to be in daycare, but if you don't work, then they'll support your child to be in daycare. And so that was my main focus, is that we really need to focus on the children, that I don't feel either of the parties have done in the past few years.
Interesting. Now then, over to Stephen. We'll keep the mic with you, and now you can ask your question to these gentlemen.
So, as I just answered my question, what would you do for the youth? Education is such a huge issue. How would you support the youth to make a better country in the future?
I think that we need to have more parent involvement in what's happening with our youth. We're seeing an uprising all across this country with the teachers union trying to bring in things that a lot of the parents completely disagree with. I think that in reference to what Mr. Grant had spoken to, the government, I go back to Daniel Boone and when he was in office, and he said the government shouldn't be here for handouts. Those things are for your community and your state to take care of. Again, limiting government is what I'm working towards.
So I do agree with the point about family involvement is the key to a lot of things. However, that's not really a role for government, and government shouldn't be meddling and trying to create different dynamics. The same way we have a problem because we incentivize certain kinds of behavior, I don't want us to just flip a coin and then start incentivizing the opposite kind of behavior. Because, again, who are the people in Washington, D.C. to say what kind of behavior for every single situation? There are situations where a woman should not try to stay with, maybe an abusive husband or whatever the case may be. So there are different situations, and we don't want to create blanket incentives for certain kind of behaviors or try to box people in one way or the other. The one key point I want to make is, since we're talking about education and kids and all this, is that the federal government is not authorized under the U.S. Constitution to really do anything in this regard. The Department of Education is unconstitutional. It should be abolished. I've seen a few people in Congress who've tried to put those one-line bills. What we talked about, what I think Edward was trying to hint at about single-issue legislation versus, these kind of 1,000-page bills that have tons of things like buried deep inside to, the Inflation Reduction Act with, all the oodles of things that they've promised. But with education, again, you want to have local control, and when I say local, I mean really all the way down to the parent and the individual. Parents should decide, and it's something I believe in. My two older kids are homeschooled, so I think parents should have the direct say in what their kids are learning. I think we should have the utmost freedom. But that, again, this gets to something that's more of a state issue, and we're running for federal office. So at the federal level, just get the federal government out. It's not authorized by the Constitution.
Thank you. Now, Edward's turn to ask you gentlemen his question for today.
I think my question would be, we all have agreed that this government has become a bit of a problem, and to me, part of that problem is allowing private entities and agencies to have control, like we've seen with the vaccines and the COVID problem that we had. I think one of the other things that is also a big issue, and I would like either of these gentlemen or both of these gentlemen to answer, do you think we should get rid of the Federal Reserve and go back to the gold standard?
Okay, let's go with Dennis first on that one.
I mean, I said in my opening, I am the Federal Reserve candidate. I've talked about that at length, and I believe in monetary freedom. The gold standard, again, maybe that's the best solution. I don't know. I don't want necessarily a top-down government deciding what the answer is. I believe that the answer should come from the market. People can determine better what their needs are and what serves their needs best. So maybe it's not even going to be one thing. Maybe for certain kind of transactions, it'll be hard asset, gold and silver-backed currency. Maybe for other things, it'll be cryptocurrency, Bitcoin and whatnot. So I don't know what the answer is, but the point is we need to certainly get away from the fiat money of the Federal Reserve that has been printing and devaluing the dollar for more than a century at this point. So that's an easy one for me.
Okay, over to Stephen.
So my history, I was a little young for the savings and loan crash, but I was there for the dot-com bust. I was there for the housing bubble, and now after the pandemic, we see when the Fed puts rate at 0% to try to build the economy back up. It has worked for the rich, not necessarily for everyone. And so that's where we have to focus on what the government is supposed to, what the Federal Reserve is supposed to do. It's supposed to be fair for everyone. And I feel that the way that the current system is working is done a great job of making sure we have not had that depression that happened in the 1930s. They're a little late whenever they do something. It seems that it's somehow politically motivated. And so the problem with politics right now is that, it's still an appointed position by the president or someone else approved by the Senate. And so that's why, as a senator, making sure that the people that get appointed are the best candidates. And so I'm not going against the Federal Reserve, because I understand that in a few years that we should be having inflation under control. But it's something where when you put interest rates at 0% for more than a year, you're going to have inflation. It's inevitable that we've seen in our history.
There it is, folks. Those are our questions for the candidates. We're now going to have a closing statement from each of the candidates where they can address you and ask for your vote this November, and then we'll wrap it up. And really want to thank the gentleman for coming in today, and very impressed with all three. Real people with real ideas and real concerns. So Stephen, we'll start with you, sir.
Well, first I want to thank all the fans of the Space Coast Daily and everyone and all your staff for making this such a pleasure to be here. One of my slogans is our government is accountable to the people. I represent people, not a political party. There needs to be a time for change, and the way that I have that is that term limits for Congress, immigration court reform, military expansion. I believe that we need to do more to make sure that we are safe and that we provide opportunities for our youth to serve their country. Currently, the military is stating that our soldiers should get food stamps, that anyone who wants to volunteer for the Peace Corps or AmeriCorps should be living in poverty. And I feel that that's something that we need to address immediately, because forgiving student loans for nothing is not something that I like to see. I feel that anybody who is going to get an education, use that whatever that they've learned to better our country. And the last is the environment beautification. We deal with the natural and the human environment, and we need to protect and preserve that. Speaking of the natural environment, my main thing is that we should do whatever we can to encourage our citizens and corporations to plant more trees. And as for the human environment, we need to find sustainable housing for everyone.
Okay, thank you very much.
Stephen B. Grant, Stephen.com, 561-501-3783. I look for your vote on November 8th. Thank you.
Thank you, Steve. I will say that we will have links to all these gentlemen's assets online, so you can reach out to them if you'd like, ask some questions, and maybe thank them for coming down to Brevard County today to join us. Now then, over to Edward Gray, your closing statement, sir.
Well, I would again like to thank Space Coast Daily for allowing us to have this platform to have the opportunity to make our voice heard. I am a writing candidate. I am an independent. I plan on going to D.C. with the main idea of stopping the stupidity that we're seeing going on and has been going on for multiple administrations, and changing Washington back to what it should be, which is by the people, for the people, and especially of the people. No longer should the lobbyists and the special interest groups have a stranglehold on our people up in D.C., because if I get in there, that would be one of the first things I would do, is try and push them out of D.C. We need to be able to focus on the problems that are at hand, and we certainly don't need outside influences trying to make a change in that respect. And you can find, they'll have a link to all of my stuff on here. So I appreciate, again, Space Coast Daily for putting this on.
Thank you, Edward. Over to Denis Misgoy.
Thank you guys again for giving us the forum and the opportunity here to be able to speak to voters in this format. And I want to applaud my peers over here. Even where we have disagreements, we all recognize that one of the biggest problems, and I think most Americans today recognize that at the core of a lot of our problems is the two-party system and what it has done. One thing that's different about me is being a candidate from the third largest party in the country is that a win for me would represent something fundamentally different, not just another independent who's going to caucus one way or the other, and maybe do a couple things a little different on the edges or tinker around the edges in terms of policy. I represent a radical, different change to a commitment to individual liberty, to peace, to non-interventionism, to the idea of that the role of government is strictly to preserve or to protect the individual rights to life, liberty, and property. That's it. All of this sort of meddling and spending and redistribution of wealth and everything else that's gone on is outside of the bounds, and we need to get to that. And it's not going to happen overnight. This is a long game. But how much longer can we wait? And that's one of my taglines, is change cannot wait. We cannot wait any longer. We're $30 trillion in debt, inflation above 9%, and our leaders are, as I say, escalating conflicts with 2 other nuclear-armed powers simultaneously. We can't afford to allow them to continue on any longer. We have to begin the process of change. That's what my candidacy represents. Again, my name is Denis Misgoy. Check out the website. They'll have the link, but misgoy.com. Look at more of the issues because we didn't really get into. There's so much more we can get into and so much more we can talk about. But thank you guys again.
Thank you, Denis Misgoy, taking the initiative to help get this done today. And I want to thank you all for watching. Like Denis just said, we can't get everything in this short time we have for you, but I hope that now you'll feel more comfortable and know more about these gentlemen, Denis Misgoy, Edward Gray in the middle, and Stephen Grant. When you look at those ballots coming in the mail or whether you're going to go vote in person, you've got some options out there. These gentlemen are real people with real ideas and real solutions, and the confidence and the commitment to step forward into a tough challenge, that's for sure. I want to thank them once again. I want to thank all of our folks at the Erdman dealership here at the Space Coast Daily TV studios. And you can go back, folks, look at this post below, and you'll see links to each one of these gentlemen's websites, their pages, so you can learn more about them. And by all means, it's up to you here, November 8th. For Denis Misgoy, Edward Gray, and Stephen Grant, I'm Giles Malone for Space Coast Daily. Stay tuned. Space Coast Daily is Brevard's most trusted news. Through spacecoastdaily.com and Space Coast Daily's social media reach, hundreds of thousands of people stay informed every day. Through Space Coast Daily's unmatched digital reach, with the Space Coast Daily's direct mail newspaper and Space Coast Daily, the magazine in print, our loyal and engaged viewers enjoy free local news they can trust every day, and all at no charge thanks to our successful advertising clients. And also at our special events at Space Coast Daily Park in Vieira, where hundreds of thousands of people see our clients' advertisements. Call today to get your message seen on Space Coast Daily and take your business to new heights. Get launched with Space Coast Daily. Call 321-323-4460 today.